Hi, I'm Bill Howden, the founder of Sensible Surrogacy. And today we're going to be discussing where to have your surrogacy journey. What countries are safe, what countries are affordable, and what countries are just downright dangerous. So if you've been following along the video series, then you've heard me talk a lot about different countries with different legal frameworks and different costs. Today we're going to go over what are the available countries worldwide and where's the best place to have your surrogacy journey. And when we look at different countries worldwide, we really can separate them into a few different categories. And the first is countries where surrogacy is regulated and it allows for commercial surrogacy. After that, we also have countries where surrogacy is legal but restricted, countries where there is no regulation whatsoever, and then countries where surrogacy has just been outright banned. So the first group of countries are countries where surrogacy is regulated, commercial surrogacy is supported, and this is really just a handful of countries worldwide. So the first country we're looking at is the United States. And the US is considered to be the gold star standard for gestational surrogacy worldwide. And in part, that's because of sort of the media hype that's gone around surrogacy in the US, especially in Southern California. Maybe you've seen the Kardashians on TV, or if you've read about Ricky Martin or Elton John having their children born in the US. But in general, the US is a pretty good spot to have a surrogacy program. The states generally are favorable towards surrogacy. There's only a handful of states that are, we would call, unfriendly. The most friendly states in the US would be California, Nevada, Washington State, Maine, New Hampshire, and a few more on the East Coast. And these are states that will support a pre-birth order. And a pre-birth order is an important part of the US law. It's that when the pregnancy reaches about the third trimester, there's a court process that declares that the intended parents should be named on the birth certificate, and they will be the legal parents from the moment of delivery. You compare that to what we would call a somewhat friendly state, which would be states like Ohio or Pennsylvania or Arkansas that have post-birth orders or a post-birth legal process that would amend the birth certificate with the names of the intended parents. In these somewhat friendly states, the birth certificate is generally issued with the name of the surrogate, but then a quick legal process that takes 2 or 3 weeks will remove her name and replace them with the names of the intended parents, right? Both of those are pretty safe and secure legal processes, so you don't have to worry about the law and the legal framework in the US. But of course, every destination has its drawbacks as well as its benefits. And the drawback, obviously, in the US is that it is expensive. Right now, a typical program in the US is going to start at the low end at about $100,000 all the way up to $150,000 to $160,000, right? And that is a huge investment, and in a lot of cases it makes the US just not viable for most couples. And what I like to say is, if you're considering surrogacy and you have to ask how much or if you can afford this destination, then chances are you can't afford the US. Because one of the problems with the US is not just that it's expensive, but that the costs are generally very difficult to predict. And the American medical system and the American insurance system is quite complicated, and costs vary and change without notice. So the most legally secure place to have your surrogacy journey is actually not in the United States like you might think, but actually in Eastern Europe. And the most secure destination is really the Ukraine and possibly Georgia. The Ukraine is unique in countries around the world in that its surrogacy laws actually support commercial surrogacy, and they state, unlike the US, that the surrogate has no legal rights and that the baby is the legal child of the parents, of the intended parents, from the moment of conception, and there is no legal process that's required. You'll remember that in California, we need to have a pre-birth order sometime in the middle of the pregnancy, but not so in Ukraine. In Ukraine, there's no legal process. From the moment that the embryos are conceived, the child that results is the legal child of the intended parents, and that makes Ukraine very unique worldwide. Ukraine's also quite affordable. Programs in Ukraine start at around $50,000, which is a third to a half of what the US is going to charge. And there are unique programs in the US that are affordable for guarantee programs or other special packages and special concierge services that are available. The downside, of course, in Ukraine is that there are restrictions. And Ukraine, as well as Georgia and other countries in the area, restricts surrogacy only to heterosexual married couples and couples who have a medical need for surrogacy. So you need to provide a copy of your marriage certificate, and you need to provide medical records, or at least a letter from your doctor stating that you're unable to carry the pregnancy yourself and that the doctor recommends surrogacy. So the second group of countries are countries where there is a legal framework in place, but the legal framework has restrictions against commercial surrogacy and only allow altruistic surrogacy. And these are classic examples: Canada and the UK. Canada, which has become quite a popular surrogacy destination, has very strict altruistic surrogacy laws, and as a result, it is technically illegal to have any commercial activity surrounding your surrogate. So you're not allowed to advertise for your surrogate. You're not allowed to hire someone to manage her, to go out and find her and compensate her throughout the pregnancy. These are all things that you are supposed to be doing yourself in cooperation with your clinic. Now, that doesn't mean that those services aren't available, and there is sort of a cottage industry in Canada that has popped up that provides those services sort of surreptitiously, but technically those are illegal. And what we find in Canada is that there's a move in the government and among some government agencies to more strictly enforce the surrogacy laws and the altruistic laws. The UK is similar to Canada, but they are actually much more strict in terms of surrogate compensation and the limitation on commercial activity. And as a result, it's almost impossible to find a surrogate now in the UK because you cannot advertise, you cannot hire anybody to really assist you in the process, and really, as a result, there are no agencies functioning really in the UK anymore. Programs in Canada, they do have their benefits. Although the surrogate's name is on the birth certificate when the baby is born, it is a legal formality to amend the birth certificate with the names of the intended parents, the parents who are on the contract. And to that extent, altruistic surrogacy is supported, and the altruistic surrogacy contract is supported in Canada. And it's somewhat cheaper than you would find in the US. Typical surrogacy program in Canada is now probably about $75,000 to $80,000 US dollars. And that's for a very inclusive program that includes egg donors and everything else that you might need on your journey. Surrogacy in Colombia is relatively new to the world stage, although it's been available locally since 2009, when a court decision established the validity of surrogacy contracts in the country. Since then, surrogacy has become more popular in Colombia, especially among same-sex couples. Colombia has a very progressive society, including gay marriage, gay adoption, anti-discrimination legislation, and so surrogacy is available in Colombia for all couples. That's the good side. The downside is that the legal framework in Colombia is not quite as secure as it is, for example, in Ukraine. Colombia Colombia has no laws specifically regarding surrogacy, and in the absence of the law, the court decision in 2009 has become the de facto law. So that decision upholds the surrogacy contract, but when the baby is born, the prevailing law is going to be family law, and so the surrogate mother's name is still put on the birth certificate, and some sort of legal process is required to remove her name from the birth certificate and replace it with the non-genetic partner on the surrogacy contract. That can be a lengthy process and something that will probably happen once you get back home. And it's the biggest downside in Colombia. Otherwise, pricing in Colombia is really affordable. It's about $5,000, $50,000 for a surrogacy program, a standard program, up to about $64,000 for a guarantee program. Surrogacy in Greece is possible for foreign couples since 2014, when a law was passed allowing foreign couples to come and do surrogacy there as long as their surrogate mother is a Greek citizen. Now, the law generally is similar to what we've seen in the rest of Eastern Europe. You need to be a heterosexual married couple, or at least a couple in a recognized civil union under Greek law. In an odd twist of legality, single women are allowed to do surrogacy there, but not single men and not gay male couples. The other requirements are that the surrogacy agreement has to be altruistic, that there needs to be a medical need, so medical records need to be provided along with your surrogacy contract, and all of that needs to be submitted before your surrogacy programs begin, has to be submitted to a local court where a judge can review it and approve your surrogacy journey. That is typically just a formality, but can add a couple of months to the total time for your surrogacy journey in Greece. Programs in Greece are pretty reliable, and they have the added benefit of being in the EU. So if you are an EU citizen and your baby is born in Greece, you have free movement throughout the rest of Europe without the need for complicated immigration procedures and bureaucracy. Programs in Greece, however, are not cheap. They're more expensive than what you would find in the rest of Eastern Europe. Right now, a typical program in Greece is going for about 80,000 US dollars. So you may have read about the possibility of surrogacy in Mexico, and there are several programs that are offering creative solutions for surrogacy in Mexico. But surrogacy in Mexico is possible only on an unregulated basis, right? There is no legal framework in Mexico, and your surrogacy contract there is going to be treated really nothing more than a handshake between you and your surrogate mother. That means that she can basically change the terms of the surrogacy agreement at her whim. She can apply for custody rights, she can apply for parental rights or parental support, and there's really not a lot that you can do about it other than to sue her in local family court, where you really don't have a lot of benefits. But that is actually not the real issue with unregulated surrogacy in Mexico. The real issue is that in the lack of any legal framework, in the absence of any law, the government's attitude towards surrogacy and their treatment of surrogacy is really just a political issue. And this is what we've seen in countries like Cambodia and Thailand, where one day surrogacy was a legal, viable medical procedure for infertility, and following a change in public opinion after, say, a media scandal, the government changed its categorization of surrogacy from medical to human trafficking. And what we saw in a matter of days was that surrogates became afraid that they were going to be arrested, parents were being fined, agents were being put into prison, and all of that happened without any due process, without any sort of legislative process, simply because in the lack of a law, the government can change its attitudes and how it treats surrogacy on a whim, right? And that is why, in general, we advise couples to stay out of unregulated surrogacy destinations like Mexico, like Guatemala, like Kenya. Now, there are some options, right? In Mexico, there are programs that will offer to get a judicial review and basically an approval of your surrogacy contract by a judge. before you start your program. And that offers a little bit of sort of an ad hoc legal framework and some security in Mexico. That's an option, but be aware that that's also going to add 3 to 4 months to your surrogacy journey and probably a significant cost as well. So programs like that, although they're more viable, are also going to be more costly and take a longer time. So the final group of countries are countries that you may have heard about that were popular destinations in the past, and maybe they still are out there on Google as being viable destinations. And these would be places like surrogacy in India, surrogacy in Nepal, Thailand, Cambodia, Laos. These are all possible destinations from some years ago, but let me assure you, each of these countries has passed or is in the process of passing legislation that will make surrogacy completely illegal. In some of these countries, there are stiff fines for intended parents. There are prison sentences, possibly for surrogate mothers or for agents that are working there. So in general, if you are thinking about surrogacy or you've read about surrogacy in one of these destinations, look elsewhere. If you have any questions about any of the surrogacy destinations that we've talked about, you can get more detail on the surrogacy guide on our website at sensiblesurrogacy.com/thesurrogacyguide. And you can always send us a message and ask for our advice or contact and talk to a consultant for free by sending a note to info@sensiblesurrogacy.com, and one of our consultants will be available to answer your questions. We also have a variety of videos available on our YouTube channel that will talk about some of these countries specifically. And we have some upcoming webinars that are scheduled that are going to talk in great detail about a lot of what I've covered today. So I hope to see you in one of those.